Gun Nation, it was very clear why I began it. To me, you know what I mean? It was like I've got a good story. I know why. I know what I did before it that led to it. With this one, it's less. I mean, it's more obvious because it's an environmental thing, which is all around us.
But you said that with Love Me, you had the same thing.
With Love Me, it was less clear why that project then.
It's less clear.
It was less clear to me. You know, what are you looking for?
Sorry, from my phone, this is terrible. Like, that's... what the hell did I do with my phone?
No, I haven't.
There we go, I put it here. I just didn't want it to ring.
Ringers off. Yeah.
But I think that's part of, like, I mean, that's what when I was talking to you about, I was talking about with someone about this, about how you never get anyone say like, oh, well, I don't know why I did that.
Right, yeah.
Also, I mean, there's always like a mentally rational explanation.
Yeah.
Little cat.
Yeah. So, are you saying that you almost welcome the idea if someone admits that they don't know what the fuck they're doing?
Because I don't think you don't know. I feel like there's a lot to intuition and...
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot we know, but we just don't rush. Like, your brain hasn't got there yet to explain it.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. Yeah, sometimes later you might have a better idea. Sometimes it's just a building, something is building within you. You're observing things without knowing, without thinking about them. They're happening around you. Like this project, obviously, concern for the environment is kind of everywhere. But funny enough, when I began it, my reasoning then was that there was a lack of interest in the environment. And it's taken me so long that actually there is now more interest in it, obviously. But now my argument is that we hide from the reality. The more we know, the more we hide from it.
What do you mean?
Are we recording yet?
Oh, we are recording.
Oh.
But it's fine. I think I'll probably go back.
Yeah, fair enough. When I first kind of conceptualized the project, this was before the lockdown. It was before anyone had ever heard of Extinction Rebellion. And I think they put, I suppose, a debate about the environment more in our cultural day-to-day language. Up till then, obviously there were scientists, there were people lobbying to clean up the environment who were concerned about climate change, all of those things. But there was a general feeling in the public of not really taking it seriously, you know. So when I began the project, that was quite a strong feeling. Why is nobody talking about it in a serious way, in a kind of public discourse? And then a number of things happened. You know, we had the lockdown. Well, first of all, there was the sort of creation of Extinction Rebellion, who started doing these street protests. And whether you support them or not, they were quite effective in being visible and getting a conversation going, even with people who hated them. Then there was a lockdown, and I think something about that time, you know, because the weather was beautiful and everyone was trapped in their little environments, people started kind of treasuring the outdoors or their local park or their garden or, you know, anything, nature. So there was also that, and also a disconnect from the hustle and bustle of life and your jobs and the stress and everything. So I think people sort of emerged with a sort of much stronger feeling of some craving for a connection with nature. So that was also a cultural shift. So actually my project sort of changed as it went. And now it's fundamentally about how, at a time that we divorce ourselves from nature and destroy it increasingly, how at the same time we create these kind of illusions or these choreographed experiences or interfaces with a kind of artificial version of nature in order to make ourselves feel better or to satisfy a craving or for a connection, or to mask what we're really doing as a kind of reassuring...
So like patting yourself in the back or something like that? Or like more like...
Not quite that, because it's not really saying, oh, we're doing well. It's more just offering something to ourselves that reassures us, that makes us think, oh, we still have a connection. It's still there. Nature still exists. So in the project, it's not all about kind of artificiality and fake nature. the project also includes, for instance, national parks in America. So these are kind of big parks of what people like to call pristine nature. I mean, it's not pristine, but it's at least it's nature.
It's what you imagine as when someone says nature, it's like big mountains.
Exactly. There's animals,
Wild
there's
animals.
mountains and vistas and views. But what there also is roads and hotels and toilets and restaurants and viewing platforms and picnic spots, miles of roads. And I think arguably those kind of demarcated zones of nature have become almost like a museum or a theme park. So we go there to see nature and to be reassured that it's still there, but it's increasingly surrounded by us, by humans and our developments. So the danger is that it's offered up like a kind of a consumer experience, a kind of commodified product for us to consume. So people go there in their cars and they queue up for hours, literally sometimes, with their air conditioning on and their windows up. And I admit, when I drove there, I had my air conditioner on too in my rental car. The horror is that, I'm very much part of this. I'm not pointing the finger at individuals. It's something cultural. I mean, obviously I was there to document it and, photograph it, but it's in a hot place and, you're in traffic and we want comfort. And that's the other thing. They don't want risks. They want smooth tarmac and they want a picnic spot and they want to be able to see nature almost from the window of the car. So all the thorns and the biting insects have been removed. So that's a version of real nature which is in the project because it becomes part of the project because of its sort of stage managed, choreographed nature. And the same with safari parks in Kenya. That was one of the last things I went to for this project. I mean, I've just finished it. And so I went to Kenya to the Masai Mara, national parks.
Yeah.
And there, you could argue, but this is really wild. This is nature in the wilderness. But is it? These animals are now alive. They're our guests. We've allowed them to survive. And they're like actors performing for tourists who pay, very large sums of money to go there. And one of the images in the book is there's this kind of rocky outcrop with an amazing view, and there's a picnic blanket rolled out and an old gramophone record player and a bottle of champagne and pillows, and they've recreated a scene from the film Out of Africa, which is a colonial Western version of Africa already, even in the film, and people are paying a lot of money to go to Kenya and to have the Out of Africa picnic experience overlooking this vista with a paid Maasai warrior standing nearby with a spear who's on the payroll to make the whole thing feel authentic and exciting, with animals that are there across the plains. They're wild animals, but they're living in increasingly what is, I don't want to call it a zoo, but their territory, their habitat.
Like an open zoo, almost.
Yeah, it's more that the fact that their habitat is becoming smaller and smaller. So they're being herded in tighter and tighter pockets of land. And so, again, it becomes a choreographed experience. And then in the project, there's the more extreme versions of it, which are the really artificial things, the really fake things. Dubai, indoor ski slopes in 40-degree heat outside. Theme parks, Walt Disney's version of Africa in Florida, where you pay your money and enter Africa with bongo drum players and
which doesn't sound too far from the fake experience, the pseudo-colonial thing that were in Kenya.
That's true, and the two become more and more similar each year. That's the terrifying fact of it. And so, this is happening in Florida. You have your fake Africa and people queue up and they enter the gates of Africa and there's palm trees and foliage and hippos and rhino, real animals. And then in the more extreme version is, for instance, one of the images in the book is in China, where there's polar bears, live polar bears living in, really they're just glass enclosures with plastic, fiberglass Arctic vistas, fiberglass rocks and ice, with a polar bear living out their existence behind a huge glass screen in a zoo or even in a shopping mall, where people flock to see this creature. And these people are us, we crave a connection with nature. That's the extraordinary thing as well, that we destroy it and divorce ourselves from it, but at the same time we crave the very thing that we're separating ourselves from.
I mean, there is this really good book by John Berger called Looking at Animals. You read it?
I absolutely love it. It's called Why Look at Animals.
It's very small. No, it's very short. And I remember he talks a lot about this, how the child, for example, looks for super exciting nature where like the tiger is hunting all the time, or there's always like stuff going on in documentaries because they edit them and they're beautiful and they're amazing. And then suddenly you come to the zoo and the tiger is just like a dull creature. Even if you went to the safari, the tiger is just like sleeping.
Yeah.
Or like it's not going to do something exciting because you're there. No,
absolutely. I mean, it's such a good book. I discovered it kind of halfway through the project. And this often happens because, your attention is on a thing and then you make all these discoveries. It's like if you want to buy a car of a certain brand, suddenly you notice them everywhere. The same when you're working on a project, you're receptive to things all around you. And then I found this John Berger book and I read it, and it was as if he was writing it for the project. I mean, obviously he was first. He's a brilliant thinker. If he was alive, I would be outside his door now begging him to use it as an introduction. But that book, it's about the experience of visiting zoos. It's about the way we see animals, about the contract we have between...
Because they can't speak. Also, the fact that animals, you can just look at them and they can only look you back. That's one of the biggest communication you can have with an animal is like look each other in the eye. There's no.
Well, true. I mean, they. I'm not going to say they can't speak because maybe they can.
Oh yeah.
We can't speak their language.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it's really. I don't know. It's a really difficult subject. Even going to, for instance, when I was in China, one of the pictures in the book is of a chimpanzee, and he's sitting on a little perch on a wall, surrounded by this huge painted scene of the jungle. But it's painted on flat concrete. So what we see as a viewer is a very beautifully painted tropical scene of a jungle in vivid colours with a chimpanzee in the middle of it. But what the chimpanzee sees, I suspect, is not that. I mean, it might as well be grey concrete to that animal.
Oh, okay.
So the painting is done for us, not for the animal. It's to make this view more palatable and more pleasurable and less depressing.
Yeah, like you paint the prison cell as an outdoors scene.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the prisoner would benefit from that in some tiny way.
Well, yeah, because there's no one that goes to see. But like, what I mean is the idea of is to make, like, if the guard of the prison was like looking into a prison cell and be like, oh, they're fine, they got like blue skies painted in.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm not sure that with a human in a prison cell, maybe they would derive some kind of comfort from an alpine scene painted on a wall. Perhaps. We probably don't need to go too deep into this, but I don't think a chimpanzee would probably get the same benefit from a painted jungle on his wall or her wall. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I might be wrong, but I don't think so. Plus, they're not looking at it from the viewpoint of the human. We have the distance and we're looking straight at it. The chimpanzee's just leant up against the wall. Mm-hmm. Anyway, let's not get too detailed into this chimpanzee. But the point is, as you walk around a zoo, normally you keep walking and you stop for 30 seconds and you keep moving. And every now and again you get a kind of awkward shudder of horror, if you stay still for too long, because the reality starts seeping in. And what I did when I was there, for instance, I spent 2 days outside that chimpanzee's enclosure.
2 days?
Yeah, 2 days trying to photograph it.
What do you mean trying?
Well,
To just get
I
different?
mean, I was photographing it, but
Okay.
trying to get an image that was good, that I was happy with, that would be worthy of, being in an exhibition.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's a funny subject in its own right, isn't it? Because do you need 2 days to take a picture?
No, I don't know. I was just asking because I was thinking if you were sat there waiting for the chimpanzee to do something very specific, or it was more like, I got it.
Okay. I mean, actually, I was waiting for the chimpanzee to sit exactly where he sat in the photograph, because it was a trap door, a metal door in the wall, where I think once a day they open it. Either the animal comes out to sleep in a different small enclosure. I think that's what it was. I was going to say perhaps they feed it through that door, but I don't think it is. I think it's a sleeping cage for the animal. That I could see that it would be a great picture if the chimpanzee was perched in front of that door, because also the door was kind of painted to blend in with the jungle scene, but you could see the kind of crude outline of it.
So you were there for 2 days?
So I sat there for 2 days waiting for the chimpanzee to sit there. Yeah, I mean, sometimes you're waiting, but you don't know what you're waiting for.
Yeah.
This is, I don't know if, as a photographer, if you have ever traveled with someone, say like a partner or a friend. Better if it's a partner, because it's going to go more quickly wrong. Because the person will say to you, well, what are you doing now? Like, you've already taken a picture, should we go? Let's go and have lunch.
Okay.
And you sort of say, well, no, I mean, there's a good picture here. I
Okay.
can feel it, but I don't know where it is yet.
All the elements are
are here,
around.
but something's not.
Well,
it hasn't
timing.
happened, huh?
The timing.
I don't know. Could be anything.
Okay.
The timing. I mean, it might be the person or the animal needs to do something more interesting, or the light changes, or I don't know. An infinite number of different tiny things can happen. I don't know about you, but often I'm in a place where I think, okay, there's a potential for something interesting to make an interesting photograph here. But if I just stand here and take the picture now, it's just going to be an average one. So, you wait. Or I do anyway. I just lurk and wait and sit around. And in that instance, I mean, I did it very consciously. I took a tripod, put the camera on it. In the morning when I left my hotel, I stole food from the breakfast buffet thing and wrapped it in napkins.
Basically, you were camping.
Yeah,
like a wildlife photographer, but they wait.
It's sort of tragic in a way, isn't it? It's pathetic that I'm like acting like a wildlife photographer. You're right. In the wild, so-called wild. But I'm in a zoo, in a Chinese zoo, behind a plate glass screen.
With the buffet.
Huh?
With the buffet food.
With a kind of handmade sandwich and an apple and some scraps of whatever I've else put into the napkin. And I'm sitting there for hours and hours. And I think my point is that quite after some time, your behavior is exactly the same as the chimpanzee for a start. And you can see the tragedy of the situation, the captivity, the boredom, everything else, which all zoos have. Just by staying still long enough, that starts infecting you. Which in a zoo, the people are channeled. It's like a conveyor belt. You keep moving. And actually, John Berger does talk about that a little bit in the book. So yeah, anyway, I feel like I've got a little bit lost in different tangents here, but...
No, but I understand. I feel like suddenly, if you are bored by just sitting there 2 days, you can only imagine what the chimpanzee is feeling.
Yeah, I mean, it's a simple thing about looking, I suppose. The more you look, the more you see.
The more you stop at
the
details.
I mean, maybe it's so obvious it's stupid to even say it. But we were talking a little bit about photography as well, how to make a good image. And sometimes, the truth is you might sit there for 2 days. When you edit the work, maybe the best picture is happening in the first 10 minutes. That's possible. I mean, I went to this place called Miniature Italy, in Italy.
Okay, in Italy?
Yeah, in Rimini.
Okay.
It's called Italia en Miniatura, right? Miniature Italy. It's a theme park. And so I knew they had the Dolomites, the mountains, ice-covered mountains, but made in fiberglass and shrunken down quite small. And I'd seen a photograph of this. It was actually, the Italian photographer Luigi Guidi.
Yeah.
He'd photographed that place in the 70s when it was much more popular. This was before the internet.
Because it was new.
Well, it was new, but it was also not competing with video games, MTV, all the other shit, Netflix. It was just...
Well, people travel less also.
It was just a different cultural environment. So the idea of a miniaturized Italy, miniature Rome, miniature Colosseum, miniature everything was really interesting. Now it's almost like a joke. It's kind of quaint and almost... Not maybe joke is too strong, but it's like almost kitsch. Anyway, that is to me, like, it's sort of charming in that way.
Yeah, I mean, I genuinely think partly probably it's to do with traveling, because people couldn't travel
Maybe,
that much. I mean, in Italy, yes, but at the same time, like, I don't know, like my grandparents, I don't know if they were like moving around loads.
So you're suggesting people would have gone there because they weren't traveling?
Well, because you can't travel, you don't have that much entertainment. There's this new mini Italy thing.
Yeah.
Might as well go.
Yeah.
That's the feeling.
Yeah, exactly. More popular. It was popular.
Yeah.
And they had loads of money.
Okay.
Anyway, we're going down a tangent, but talking about Luigi Guidi. But I think they commissioned him even at the time
to
photograph it. Anyway, I didn't used to be a Luigi Guidi fan either.
Okay.
Like, I remember going back to John Berger being given, Ways of Seeing. Every student has to read Ways of Seeing at college. Mm-hmm. And I remember being told to read it, and I was bored. I don't think I even read it properly. And now, years later, I read it, and I realise it's so good.
I loved it.
So interesting.
Same, yeah.
So well written. Look in my bedroom, there's like John Berger books all on the floor around the bed. I'm sort of reading them every night. Yeah. And on any subject, you can read books of his about he's written a lot about art, about painting, and all interesting.
I think he has an approach that is also not so... It feels like a bit outside of whatever art bubble or art. So like he sees...
He's clever, but he's not trying to be clever. Do you see what I mean? And he's... he's not trying to write in such a way that it obscures the subject and dazzles you with his brilliance. He's trying to really interrogate ideas.
Yeah.
Anyway, now we're getting lost in the John Berger fan club. Let's leave them. So let's go to the Luigi Guidi fan club.
Wait. Oh, wait. You're a fan... You said you didn't. You were not a fan.
Of John Berger.
Or Luigi Guidi.
Well, no, I wasn't. Luigi Guidi, I was researching this project. That's the other thing. It took, I do a lot of research.
Okay.
Yeah?
I'm thinking maybe we should have an introduction.
Okay, well, you turned the mic on without telling me. So we've started in the middle.
That's fine.
Now you need to go to the beginning.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Or I'll cut it up. I don't know. I'll have to say, welcome.
Oh, yeah.
It's very cheesy. Anyways. And
sure, I'll leave the room if you want.
No,
to feel better.
I know, and the problem is that
I can put the cat here.
I'm always at someone's house or studio, so then it really doesn't work, the welcoming. Yeah. But yeah, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Oh, that's the bit I hate most of all too.
Okay, done.
People normally introduce themselves.
Yeah, because I don't like introducing other people.
Really?
Well, because I feel like there's always, I don't know why, there's always like, no, even if it's just like, hi, my name is this. That's it. You don't have to say, I'm this and that and the other. Just your name.
I don't even like doing that, but I'll do it. But do you want me to say...
I'll do it.
Do you want me to say this is the prod...
No.
No,
just say who you are.
It's like when I do radio, they want me to wear headphones. I can't wear headphones. And I say to them, can I not wear headphones? And they say, no, you have to. And I was like, but why? Why do I need headphones on?
Oh my God, you just like to.
No, they don't even know why. They freak out.
Really? Okay, don't introduce yourself.
No,
I'll introduce you. No, it's fine. First, I'll do the first introduction. This is Zed Nelson.
Yeah.
Yeah, confirmed.
Do you want me to confirm that's me?
Yes.
I confirm it is me.
Great. And That's it. And that was the intro.
Okay, that's a good one. Yeah, thank you for doing that because I didn't want to introduce myself for some childish reason.
Good. Well, I hate doing the welcoming. I think maybe I should stop. But yeah, sorry, we were talking about. Well, we went all around and we're talking about Luigi Ghirri.
Oh yeah. Shall I pick up on that point?
Yes, but I will start at some point. I'll pick on the beginning of things.
Let me just finish the point
You finish your
that
point.
I was making.
All
Because
yours.
I was talking about miniature Italy, and the reason I went there was because I'd done a lot of research. When I say a lot of research, probably for 2 years, just gathering photos, pictures, extracts, little writings, anything that fed into the project in some way or informed it or gave me an idea for a location or this would be good to do that. And one of them was this picture from the 1970s taken by Luigi Ghirri at Miniature Italy in miniature, this theme park, of the shrunken mini Dolomites. So here is a place where, it's not all natural world, some of it's cities, but it's like the part I was interested in was the mountain range shrunk down. So I wanted to go and photograph people interacting with that. So I went there very specifically to do that. And in doing that, I also had seen his work and then Googled and researched more and more about the photos he'd taken and was more and more impressed by them. Up till then I'd seen them, I knew who he was and I'd seen his work, but I wasn't excited by it. And then when I spent time with it, then I really got into it. So
what do you like about them? So what do you discover?
Are you suggesting that you don't like him?
I think I'm not very sure I know who he is. I think he has very strong colored
most Italians
images.
really know him. He's very well known in Italy, but perhaps not.
Yeah, no, I
not
think
as
he
well
does
known.
there's something very peaceful about his images. Is that right?
Okay, I'm really bad at describing other people's work, even my own actually, but they're projects and some of them are quite banal, so he would photograph the seaside resorts of Italy, but not often when they're quite unpopulated in off season. So people do this all the time now. It's almost become like an Instagram generic thing, isn't it? But when he was doing it, it was unusual, to see that kind of nothing happening in a picture, a banal scene, a landscape, but of a peeling wall and sort of a bench. So kind of potentially quite boring, but interesting because he had this kind of rigor and he was an obsession to doing things. And one of the things he did was at Miniature Italy, and a whole set of images which were actually really quite good. But individually, the pictures aren't wow, amazing. But when you start seeing them in groups, then you get it and you realise what he was trying to do and show. Yeah.
And what was he trying to show?
Well, it was to do with some of it was people and sort of interfacing with consumer culture. Some of it was just a study of a place. So, it was just kind of how we use our space and how humans. It's not kind of groundbreaking stuff. It's not like huge themes, environmental or, poverty. They're more gentle images about life and culture. I'm really doing a bad job of explaining it. But,
that's right. I think I think there's sometimes no point on explaining images in itself.
Exactly.
You just see them.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. You really just it's kind of work you have to look at. And,
But I was wondering what you found. That's why I was asking. It was more like rediscovering something. You are like, oh, I find this thing, but then you said it.
The funny thing is now we've been talking about Luigi Ghirri and Miniature Italy for so long that I've forgotten why.
Well, I think
why we are.
I'm gonna
finish it by saying one thing. I think if I remember rightly, the reason I was talking about it, and you can cut the last 10 minutes out, was it was about spending time photographing things.
Yes.
And I went there.
Yes.
To Miniature Italy, and I gave myself 2 days in this place to photograph it, with no kind of clear plan of what I was going to do. And then a friend of mine came down. She's Italian and she has a small child, like 4-year-old, and her partner. They said, "Oh, we'll come and meet you there. We'll visit and meet you there." And I was like, "Great." And so they did, and day one, you know, we hung out, we had a coffee, and then her little daughter was crawling all over the fiberglass mountain
Oh yeah.
with the other kids who were also all crawling around the fiberglass mountain. So this was a great image. And then she said to me, okay, look, we're going to go to the beach tomorrow, you know, an hour down the coast, you know, you're going to come with us. And I said, no, I can't, you know, I have to come back here. And she said, well, why? You know, you've already done it. And I was like, yeah, but, you know, I've given myself 2 days here. And she's like, yeah, but we're going to go to the beach. We're going to have lunch and do this. And it was a really agonizing thing to say, I can't come, especially because I already knew I had some good pictures. So I always remember, like, I don't consider myself a proper photographer in a way. I remember when I was young hearing about National Geographic photographers. You know, there's a kind of cliched idea, isn't there, of what they're like, what they look like, what they wear, their little waistcoats with pockets and all that. And I was always kind of, I wouldn't say in awe or anything, because even then I think I kind of mocked it gently. But I suppose there was some kind of aspiration towards being a proper photographer. And I used to read that they would spend like 3 months in a location, returning, you know, and I'd be like, 3 months, you know, or like, you know, a month somewhere. And I'd be like, well, I don't understand. What are they going to do for a whole, anyway, and they would go, and you'd read and they would shoot like, they shot 600 rolls of film. And, you know, and
Well,
times,
that's because it was cheap.
yeah, it was much cheaper, but still, it wasn't cheap.
Yeah,
it was just a lot cheaper.
Yeah.
And you'd hear about this. Someone shot 600 rolls of film and in a 2-month assignment. I'd be like, Jesus. You know, so I never had that in my entire life, right? But to this day, it affects me to think, oh, well, at least I can do like 2 days in one place. You know, I'm not going to go there for 2 hours, or
Well,
I want to be one of those proper people.
I was gonna say that you seem to have the same length for
everything.
regard. So it could be
Yeah.
like watching a chimpanzee is 2 days.
2 days.
And the proportion doesn't matter. The proportion of the place
Yeah,
is also 2 days for a bigger place.
exactly. 2 days.
That's it.
That's it. That's my time.
Well, I mean, I feel like that's just again what we were talking about before of like the gut feeling and this feeling of like, okay, that's it.
Well, it also, I mean, we're joking, obviously, but it depends. Like, the project took 6 years. Mm-hmm. So there were a lot of 2-day increments in that. And, I mean, it was spanned 6 years. I didn't work on it constantly for 6 years. You know, it was done over a 6-year period. Yeah, it's an interesting thing, how much you commit to something and what happens when you stay still. I don't know what, you know, that, like, things do happen if you stay still.
Well, I also
Yeah.
think that, for example, I think there's a lot of jokes around. I feel like, especially my generation, of like, how can people just sit there in a waiting room, for example? I was going to ask you, what do you do in a waiting room? Do you go on your, I don't know, like, are you someone that forces themselves not to be on their phone? And then they're like, because sometimes I do that to
yeah.
myself. I'll be like, I should just get bored.
Right,
And,
yeah,
like,
yeah.
look around.
Yeah, I try and do that too. I'm not very good at it though, because now I'm polluted like everyone else. But yeah, that feeling of like, that was a cat galloping by. Yeah, I do that. I think, don't take your phone out of your pocket. Just, you know, can you not just sit here for a minute? Yeah, I mean, it is. I agree, it's bad.
I don't know if it's bad. I feel like...
I think it is bad.
You think?
Yeah.
Fair. Why?
We're scared of silence or lack of stimulation, or people can't. I think people are literally unable to sit in a cafe on their own and have nothing to do. Look around.
You feel that way?
A little bit. I try not to, but it's like an impulse, isn't it? Look at the phone. No one's looking at each other. No one's catching anyone's eye. Yeah, it's a thing. Anyway, we're going off on one of our little tangents.
Picking up on what you were talking about research, well, you were born in Uganda.
Yeah.
And your parents were journalists.
Yeah.
I was wondering, the fact that your parents are journalists, did that ever... I don't know, I feel like your way of researching and approaching topics, maybe there's something very journalistic about it, in the sense of like, I think you really go in deep at like facts and tangible things. Like, you don't do like, it doesn't feel to me that you do like just a poetic observation of, and I was wondering whether there's something you learn. Is this something you learn from, being around journalists?
I mean, I'm not sure. Obviously, I think it has to affect you. You know what I mean? Your upbringing and things going on around you. I don't feel like a journalist myself, and I certainly don't feel like I'm a sort of reporter reporting on something in an impartial way or trying to be balanced or anything like that. Like, I'm really interested in having a point of view and trying to tell a story. So you might say it's more storytelling than journalism, but I'm sort of attracted to issues and interesting aspects of human behaviour. Trying to explore why we do things. And often they're kind of slightly negative things. I'm like, why would this happen? Why? There's subjects, like if I look at my last book, well, the last one was actually about Hackney, but that became a film about gentrification.
Yeah.
So I was trying to do a very simple, observational, poetic project where I would just wander the streets of Hackney, which is where I grew up. And I could identify that it was changing rapidly, and it was sort of hipster ground zero, and it had gone from quite a poor neighbourhood to being quite a trendy one. So there was sort of something interesting happening, but I wanted to just observe it and, photograph it kind of almost like a student.
What kind of journalism do your parents cover?
Well, back then, they were working for a newspaper, and they were working for a Ugandan newspaper in Kampala, in the capital. Later, my dad was doing more, it sounds so boring to go into it, but like family planning and global issues.
What's family planning?
Family planning is the whole issue about population and it's a really difficult subject. I mean, it's not. Family planning is just like the rights to have contraception, actually, and whether or not, and population. Oh, God, I'm scared to go into it, or I'm getting lost in it. Let's start this again.
I was just wondering what it was, but it's fine. I was wondering more.
Yeah.
Whether it was like a local that he had to go play. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, whether it's a journalism that he had to like constantly be.
Yeah, I mean, all right. It was sort of like about the developing world, and he would work often with like UN agencies, and there would be reports about kind of development in Bangladesh, or for instance, and within that would be different issues. But I wasn't closely involved in any of that. That was just going on as a background.
What got you into studying? What do you study?
So I did a degree in photography and filmmaking.
What got you there?
So I went to a super shit school in Hackney, comprehensive, possibly the worst comprehensive in London at the time, which is really saying something, because schools have got a lot better, and certainly schools in Hackney have got a lot better. And so when I was at school, secondary school, they were like, some of them were dramatically bad, and I was at one of the worst ones by just chance, really, because we'd been travelling as a family and come back to England, and I just went to that school. No one researched it or asked anything. So it was like really bad. And so when I left school, it was like kind of adrift, really. I didn't even take any exams or anything.
So you didn't, it was like that.
It was just like, also all my friends, like one was convicted of murder. Mm-hmm. This was not a friend, I might add. This was a school friend. Someone else was put in prison for GBH. It was like this whole catalogue, like my sister's boyfriend was murdered. It was like I was in this kind of section of people where even what I'm talking about doesn't really sound sort of plausible in a way, and it wasn't as bad as I'm making it sound, but I was swimming in an area where no one had any ambitions or life chances or anything. It was weird. And so I lost a few years in a dream, just kind of getting stoned and hanging out and driving a motorbike and being an idiot. And then it was like a kind of light bulb came on, and I just suddenly was bored of it all, and just wasn't enough anymore. I was bored, And so then I had to like do a kind of crash course to get qualifications in order to go to university and do a degree. And the minute I did that, it was like, oh, okay, and now I know what I want to do. I was more interested in filmmaking at first.
Is there anything that struck you? You were interested in film.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it was like film and photography, but initially I think maybe more film. And then I got quickly frustrated with it because it was more expensive and it took more time and you needed kind of people to work with. It just took ages to get anything off the ground. Whereas with photography, you could act quite quickly. You could just kind of get going.
Just do it.
Do it.
Do it yourself.
Yeah, I found that really appealing. So once I was on that course, I was like, oh, wow, this is great. I can, A, this is fun and interesting, and B, maybe I can even make a living from it.
You had references at the time of like, wow, I love this thing or this other thing? Or it was more like...
Not much, because I would say I was a bit of an idiot at the beginning. I hadn't, like when I left school, I'd kind of closed off half my brain, I think. Also, it wasn't even my fault. The schooling, the quality of teaching was so poor. It was like a muscle. I hadn't even used my brain properly in several years. I wasn't like all knowledgeable about all the best photographers and what was going on. But I do remember even like a Chris Killip picture, probably in my very early 20s. I was probably at college by then. And that picture he's got of the skinhead sitting on a wall with his head down and his knees up, and he kind of looks quite sad. I really remember that picture and it being kind of inspiring in a way. And I don't even know why, but I think it was something about, it was documentary, but it was also, I think he used to shoot on 5.4, so it had a kind of different feel to it.
I mean, I also don't think that you need references or like, it was just like wondering. I feel like, and I think I'll ask you a bit better later, because then you started at some point getting commissions as a photojournalist.
Yeah, so when I left college, then I wanted to be a photographer. I wanted to earn a living from it, not just take photographs, but I didn't want to do any other job. I wanted that to be my job, which meant earning money. So I would pitch story ideas to magazines, and get turned down and turned down and turned down and turned down. And then finally one said, all right, well, how much would it cost to go and do that? I was like, I don't know, 300 quid. It wasn't far away. And they were like, okay, do it. I mean, and so they just, in a way, I think they just were trying me out, giving me a chance.
Do you remember what was your first job?
It was about this guy. He was like an eccentric, it's totally nuts. He was an eccentric vet who flew a Cessna, and he flew this Cessna under Tower Bridge. And he was living in Jersey, and he accused the authorities in Jersey of being Nazis. He said that they'd sided with the Nazis during the war and that it was an oppressive society.
And then he flew the plane.
And then he flew his Cessna under Tower Bridge as a stunt, and he was arrested, and he was just doing all this stuff. And actually, the authorities in Jersey are a bit weird. It's a tax haven and stuff like that. Yeah. And I found it very appealing. I've always been drawn to sort of underdogs or people that are somehow taking on the system. And so I pitched this idea to go and visit him and do a story about him.
And then that was your first job. But then at some point you started flying to places to cover.
So, yeah, so I got that job. And then from then on, I got paid magazine assignments. Some of them were really interesting as well. Like I remember going to Sudan and Cuba. So, it was really exciting as well at that age to be getting work and jobs that were taking you to places.
Yeah, I was going to ask, how was that? Because also, you mentioned that there were places in conflict or like...
Yeah, but later on I started doing that. Not much later on, but that was more of my own choice. I never got an assignment to go to a place of conflict.
And why did you choose to go?
I think I was just drawn to understand things. And so I remember actually literally I had my own darkroom at home, so I would develop black and white film and print it in the darkroom. And I remember being in the darkroom, and you'd kind of get lost in this weird dark world for hours and hours and hours. And having the radio on, and there was a radio report, and it was about Somalia, that there'd been a war, and now this war had turned into a famine as well. and they were just saying no one is talking about it, no one has been there. It's just this awful situation that's unfolding. And kind of quite spontaneously, I decided to go there. And then I just did. I went there. And
I don't know, and how do you... It feels like a very... I don't know, how do you deal with that, I guess? Is there anything emotionally like to deal with when you get there and you have to take pictures, or you want to take pictures of a situation that people are struggling?
Yeah, there's nothing in a way. I mean, I'd done all my little going to demos in London, and, you go to these riot. I remember the poll tax riot in Trafalgar Square. So you kind of learn to be a photographer on the street by going and doing things like that. Mm-hmm. But then, when you go to somewhere, I mean, I literally got off an aeroplane in Somalia, and it was a war. It was a city that had been divided up by warring factions, and a famine, children and families dying in camps, like skeletons. So there's nothing that can prepare you, or there's nothing you could have done to be prepared to see that and respond to it at all, really. So then it's just, right, what are you going to do now then? You're here. So, it's like a crashing learning curve in a way, how to deal with it, how to photograph it, why you're there, how to justify being there, what the work means, who's it for,
And what do you tell yourself when... Because there must be moments where you're like, why don't I just fly back?
Yeah, not really actually, because you're very it's so you're on the interface of literally life and death, and witnessing it, and so you don't kind of get any sense of like, why am I here? It's more quite quickly a few things happened. One, you start learning and understanding about the politics of a situation. So I was attached to an agency then, and I was sending images back, like rolls of film back, by a courier. You had to send it through the airport. And they were saying, oh, you're photographing it in a way we don't want. You're doing these like portraits of people. Like we're talking about people, say, dying in a camp. And I was trying to photograph people with a certain degree of dignity and respect. And I literally remember them saying to me, no, we need crowds of people. We need to see crowds of people.
Well, I was going to ask, there's certain aesthetic or look to these images you talk about.
Yeah.
Not yours specifically, but I think when we're talking about this, people imagine certain things. And whether that was like something that you had to learn on the go.
Yeah, you do things and you don't know why you're doing them. So you might take a picture, and it might be like a Don McCullen image, or it might be, the World Press Photo got a lot of criticism because every year the winning image would be a kind of the Madonna and Child image of someone in a moment of awful tragedy, crying or beseeching, holding a child. And this became like a trope, a visual trope. And World Press Photo competition started getting more and more criticism for kind of having these same kind of images year after year. The Taylor Wessing competition had the same at the National Portrait Gallery. People ended up calling it Ginger Wessing because the winner was always a ginger woman who was naked, or a ginger girl holding a rabbit.
Oh, yeah. Really?
And so, it became a comedy, and then people started calling it Ginger Wessing. And it was like a visual thing. I mean, obviously, not every winner was, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, like a trope.
Yeah. And but so that's funnier. But the way people photograph wars, or especially foreign conflicts, there's some very, very serious things about that, because also I quickly started thinking maybe I'm reinforcing racial stereotypes. You know what I mean? This idea of just photographing war and devastation. If it's not in a really interesting context and very kind of thoughtfully done, really you're just churning out images of horror.
Yeah, which is also very... I think I was reading... Well, there's a book about it, but they talk about how there's no images really of... if you're in a war somewhere that is not the West or Europe or the US, there's no really soldiers, European soldiers or American soldiers, or that are dead.
Right, yeah. yeah, there's certain things that are allowed and expected, and there's certain things that aren't allowed, and so as a young photographer, I was quickly learning that, like on the spot, and becoming overwhelmed. Also realizing that there was a famine, but that there wasn't actually a real shortage of food. And I was like, I don't understand. How can I visit a market where there's food, and yet there's camps of people who are, and when I say dying, I mean literally dying in front of you, falling to the ground, and children, babies dying in front of you by every minute. So I'm like, how? I don't understand. But of course, it's the same as when we go to the cinema and there's a homeless person in a doorway. Mm-hmm. We step over someone drunk on the street or homeless or, whatever. And you go to the cinema and then you go for dinner.
Yeah.
Or there's people dying in the Mediterranean trying to come here, drowning in hundreds, thousands every year. And, we could solve that. We could have a ferry bringing people across every day safely. But we demand that they drown in a way. We accept it. Mm-hmm. It sounds controversial, but you understand what I mean. Like, it could be solved by tomorrow.
Yeah. There is some form of like either not wanting to deal with the issue seriously in the sense of like
it's like an economic
helping.
system. We don't want everyone to be able to come here.
Yeah.
So we don't want a ferry bringing people across, so they have to come in rickety boats that sink.
And if there's no help, and
we can't be too helpful because more people will come.
The governments could, but they don't.
No, that's what I'm saying. The governments could literally solve it overnight, but the economic model says we don't want it. We don't want to solve it. We don't want the people here. Anyway, it's getting a bit heavy, but the same in Somalia. There's a war and there's a famine and there's enough food to feed the people who are dying of hunger. But it's economics. It's who has the money and the power. And so I'm there understanding that slowly, bit by bit. And then you realize that all the guns that all the warlords and young men have are all Russian or Chinese or British.
How do you find
American?
When you were there?
You can see it. These are all Russian Kalashnikovs or American M16s.
Okay.
So you're like, oh, okay. And then you hear a story. Where did the guns come from? Oh, America armed the warlord. He was president. He was mentally unwell, very brutal. But he was armed by Western governments because they wanted control of that territory. So they poured weapons in to give him power. And then, then the Russians armed the other side. And it's happening in Ukraine now. Mm-hmm. So then you think, oh my God, it's all about geopolitics. So as a photographer, you're like, I don't know how to document this anymore.
Yeah, you mean that once you find the root.
Well, like, how do you tell the true story? You could just take a picture of someone dying of hunger or someone with a gun. Mm-hmm. So then I started kind of writing, like, my captions started being like 200-word captions for every image, and then I wrote a story. No one would publish the story, or, you'd say... The pictures were being published in the independent newspaper every day that I send them. So I felt like the work was being used, but it was it wasn't in context enough. So that was the beginning of a journey of trying to tell more complex stories.
And why didn't you... something I was wondering is like, why not be just a journalist that writes?
Right.
For you?
Well, because I'm a slow writer, I don't get the same pleasure from it. I just think there's already good writers doing it. I happily work with good writers. And also it's just different. It's journalism is great at some things, but it fails at others. Photography is great at some things and it fails at other things. Filmmaking, that's why I've ended up making films as well. Because you get to the outer limits of photography where you've done a project and you're like, that one could have gone further.
What do you think is for you the overlap where writing cannot really reach and then photography does?
It's really hard to break it down, I guess, but sometimes it's just a matter of, like, a photograph can affect you instantly. You don't have to sit down for an hour and read a 4,000-word article. So it has an immediacy that can get attention quickly, and it can work on you on an emotional level. yeah, to me, there's no battle between words and pictures. Bring
No,
it
of
on.
course.
Do whatever works best.
No, that's why I was wondering.
But yeah, it's such a big question, isn't it? About what does one do in the other?
No, for you, I don't
Just photography was my language in a way,
know. Okay.
and then filmmaking as well.
Before you started your first photo book, you had an instance where you were in a car and you got attacked. The car.
Oh yeah. So yeah, and the other thing I'm really interested in is drawing connections between one thing happens and then another, and then that's why you end up doing a project because of these things that happened. So what happened in Somalia, and then after that went to Angola and then El Salvador, different places, all trying to work on these themes and trying to do them in more complex ways, often failing, I might say, but still really trying. And then I ended up in Afghanistan because by then I was interested in conflicts of the Cold War. So I was focusing on conflicts that had begun and really were caused by these foreign superpowers meddling in other countries. So I became very focused on that as a subject. So Afghanistan was an obvious one because it was Russia and America fighting proxy wars in these places. So I went to Afghanistan, and then really things went wrong, and I was in a car that was ambushed and kind of machine gunned from two sides. And I had an interpreter who got shot through the neck. And I was also there with a colleague, and he got shot in both arms. Really badly. I mean, not like cowboy gunshot. Cowboy gunshot is when you heat up your knife in the campfire and you pull out the bullet.
Okay.
His arms were shattered, all the bones were exploded in his arms, and nerve damage, and they had to cut his legs open to take enough nerves and things to rebuild his arms. That sort of the kind of injuries that are caused by like an AK-47 or a high velocity rifle, modern guns. So it was it was obviously awful and terrifying.
So everyone else got injured except you?
There was a driver as well.
And there was a driver.
There was a driver, and I'm not going to go into the whole story because it's just. But basically, the windows started exploding around us, and there were bullets hitting the door, and it felt like being in a tinfoil. Felt like the car was made of tinfoil, and the driver kind of sort of became like a wild animal. He burrowed into a ball under where the pedals were, and I was in the passenger seat. And I remember almost I kind of woke up in a way. I came to. So one minute you're not thinking, you've become an animal in a way. Terrified person, not thinking, almost like, and then I just remember coming out of it and then being able to think very clearly and thinking, we've probably got 10 seconds more before we're all dead, because the car wasn't moving anymore either. It had stalled. We'd sort of spun in a circle and the car was not moving. It was just being shot to pieces. So I remember that moment of thinking, have to drive away or we're dead. And then trying to coax the driver into starting the ignition. And he wouldn't get up. And I remember having to then steer, and push the accelerator down, at the same time crouching behind the dashboard. Anyway, so we got out of it. And, I was very lucky in a way. I mean, I'm not exactly lucky being in that experience, but, there was bullet holes through the headrest of my chair and the glass and the windscreen in front of me. So at some point I ducked and could or would have been, shot through the head. So, but what that did, that kind of ended this trajectory of things I'd been doing, where I finally, not only because it was truly terrifying, but also seeing close up what the bullets did to a close friend, feeling so frustrated by everything I'd seen. All of that was when I did the book Gun Nation about American gun culture, because I also thought, actually, there's a war going on in America. No one's talking about it. We're quite happy to talk about wars in Afghanistan and Somalia. We're quite happy to give them weapons, and let them all kill each other and document it and say, oh, isn't it terrible? But we, as you suggested, we look at things differently in our own countries, or we don't look at certain things. So I thought, I'm going to photograph the source of these guns, where they come from, what they do to a population when you let people have them without gun control, and I'll photograph it in black and white like a kind of war story in a way, and it will be about white middle-class America. That was the other thing. I thought everyone talked about it as a gang problem in America.
This was what year? Roughly?
1998.
Mm-hmm.
I thought, I will not photograph it like a gang issue. Yes, there's a gang problem, and yes, they have guns and they kill people, but that's just a symptom of mass saturation of weapons in a society. So I'll look at people who sell them, the advertising industry, the manufacturing industry, the people, the white middle-class Americans that buy them and demand, to be able to buy them on Facebook. Well, Facebook wasn't invented back then, but later. Now you can buy weapons, anyhow, through Facebook or mail order or whatever. So I was interested in showing the kind of apparatus and exploding the myths about, even exploding the romance of guns, like really showing them.
I mean, I think that's interesting, and across your work, I feel like there's something about your work where there's like a first hook on maybe there's an idea. I feel like I'm hooked because I already have ideas about a topic maybe that you're covering, and the image, maybe the front image is like, I don't know, gets you in. And then as you go in the project, and it happens also with Love Me, where suddenly you see very crude, very raw things which are often avoided. And I remember, I think from this project, from the Gun Nation, the two were the one in the hospital, the blood in the hospital, and the information about how many people went to the hospital for gunshots at night.
Yeah.
And then the man without a leg, or had shot himself in the foot.
He shot his own leg off, and with a hunting rifle. So I wanted to show the absurdity of the fact that lots of people commit suicide with guns, which is a huge problem as well. Just because if you've got a gun at home and you're depressed or drunk, you can do something spontaneous and irrational. But people shoot their own legs off. Kids shoot their brothers and sisters by mistake. Like the facts, the gun facts. That's what I was really interested in looking at the myths and exploding them and saying the reality is that most of the shootings happen in domestic situations. A domestic argument that gets out of hand, a drunken partner, a teenager that takes a gun to school, an accident. All these sort of things get brushed under the carpet, and all the focus is on gangs and stuff. So I wanted to show the truth of it, but also the absurdity and the patheticness of some of it, like people blowing their own feet and legs off, to destroy the romance of guns in a way,
Yeah, I mean, I also... sorry.
No, because I'd also had to acknowledge to myself that the way Hollywood and the myth-building industries had created this idea of guns as being an icon of freedom in America, but also this thing about the Wild West and cowboys and how the West was won. All of that was manufactured by the advertising industries in North America, even during the years of the Wild West, where they had to work out how to sell guns in huge numbers. When they learned how to mass produce weapons, they had these factories that would make thousands of weapons for if they were engaged in a war. But when they weren't at war, these factories had to keep in production. So there was a very cynical, clear, thoughtful strategy to try and work out how they could sell guns to all of America to keep their factories open and profitable. And so they literally devised advertising strategies, kind of, lent on this idea of patriotism, or even selling fathers guns for their sons. This is to do with kind of, being a real man.
So make it like almost like a culture.
Yeah, they built the culture.
It has become part of, in some places, it feels, I mean, I don't know, I've never been, but
Yeah. And so all of this is reflected in that book, in the work I did. You know, yeah, it's all there. And that's what I was interested in, trying to do what hadn't been done. And also you said, you know, I photographed, for instance, in an emergency room in a hospital. I spent a week there, not 2 days, but actually a week, 10 days, I think, just photographing gunshot wounds coming in. So that was shot in a kind of reportage, typically documentary style. But what I was doing at the same time was photographing people on a sort of seamless grey backdrop with studio lighting, but on location.
Well, I was gonna say that because there's that story you've told before of like how you went to a gun show and then you were trying to get them to take pictures, and then suddenly no one was interested. Is that right?
Well, not just interested. They were telling me to fuck off. You know, people were very hostile.
But then,
well, this was the very, very, very first thing I did for that project. So, you know, I'd not shot a single frame of anything, and I went to Dallas because there was a gun convention in a huge convention center in Dallas. And I thought, well, that'll be a good start, you know, go and witness it, see from my own eyes. And, you know, you've got these tables. It's like, you know, a fair, it's a gun fair, all these high, sophisticated modern weapons for sale in a convention center. So I went there and I started roaming around with my camera. You know, it was like a 35mm normal camera, and I was faced with total hostility. People were suspicious. They literally told me to fuck off. So, you know, I think I did that for 2 days and I got nothing. And then on the third day and the last day of the convention, I built a studio in the corner in an empty. Someone hadn't turned up. You know, they sell these. I don't know what they call units or whatever. So there was an empty unit, and so I was like, okay, I'm going to build my little studio there with umbrellas on the lights. So I looked like a sort of wedding photographer or something. And the minute I built the studio, people started queuing up to be photographed. And I found I could go and invite even presidents of gun manufacturers who were there on their stands, Colt, Remington, Smith & Wesson. They'd be like, oh, what are you doing over there? And I'd be like, oh, I'm doing portraits. So I'd go, come over, bring your best-selling gun. And they would pose with it. And it's very, very hard to talk or photograph these people. You know, they're closed to the press. So that was like an amazingly bizarre thing that happened.
And well, I guess you learned. That's something you learned on that day?
Yeah, I learned from that. I learned, you know, a lot of photography is psychology, how you approach people. You know, it really is. There's a lot of psychology involved in it.
What do you think that was involved there? Is it just?
Well, I mean, that was not just psychology, but that was maybe different because I think they thought I was part of the show. They thought, well, there was nothing that said I was an exhibitor or I was part of the gun trade or anything. So what did they think? I just think psychologically I became... It's like this thing I told you about staying still and staying somewhere long enough. As a roving photographer with a small-ish camera, I'm a journalist. I look like what they identified as something they didn't like, poking their nose into their business, trying to catch them off guard. But as soon as I was stationary with a tripod and lights and paraphernalia, I just became unthreatening. I think that's what it was. Not only was I unthreatening, but they came to me.
Because they wanted that picture, of course.
Yeah, they were like, oh, can I have my picture taken?
Yeah.
So maybe they thought I was part of the show, maybe they didn't. I don't think they even thought.
How does that work? I mean, I don't know. But how does that work later for, like, publishing? That doesn't matter? Does it matter of, like...
I generally, I try and get model releases, you know, consent forms. Yeah. But I didn't on that day. That was another learning curve. Okay. Because one of the most memorable images from the whole project, there's always an image that kind of becomes like the signature image. You don't plan it, it just happens. And the one that happened with Gun Nation was Mike, this guy, holding a baby under his arm and then holding a gun in the other hand, very close to the baby. It looks a little bit like he's almost pointing it at the baby's head. He's not. The gun is in front of the child. But the proximity of baby and gun really upset people and unnerved them. And it's it's a very direct portrait. It's studio lit. It's shot on medium format camera. And that became, like, in a way, the most memorable image because of its repetition of use. And that picture was taken there. And Time magazine ended up wanting to publish the whole set of images. And they wanted to put that on the cover. And they said, do you have a consent form? And I said, no. But, he's obviously agreed to be photographed. So, aren't we good? And they were like, no. Because it's on the cover, it's kind of classified as advertising for the magazine.
Okay.
I guess the image gets reused. Somehow it's like an advert for
Well,
a
and also
magazine.
it's more difficult. I don't know. I feel like, I guess it's the call.
Anyway, so they were like, if you can't get a consent form, we're not using it. And I was like, no, come on. Because I was also young, I'd never had a cover image, certainly on Time magazine, which seemed like this big magazine then in America. And I was like, no, come on. And so I remember sending the image to all the local gun shops and in that area around Dallas, saying, do you know this man? I'm trying to track him down. And, it really spent a lot of time doing it, and I didn't get it, and they pulled it off the cover.
Is it?
Yeah, and they used an illustration, a Liechtenstein, a famous painting, sort of photorealist picture, instead. So I was like, no. And then when it came out, they did use the image, but inside the magazine. And then he contacted me, and he's like, I'd like a print. And I was like, okay. And he didn't see anything controversial about the image at all. Everyone else was up in arms. How could he do this? Why is he holding the gun next to the baby? All of this. It was seen as this symbol of horror and hopelessness. Mm-hmm. But he saw it as this very protective gesture.
I mean,
I
think with that, I feel like there's something about, in documentary and having to represent people. And I don't know how to explain it, but I feel like the worry that the other person might suddenly, I don't know, like this surprise of like, oh, you don't see yourself, like I see you.
Right.
And
of
maybe misrepresenting, or not misrepresenting, but like, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm careful. I don't misrepresent people. It doesn't mean I don't want to sometimes make them look stupid or show the horror of someone's beliefs that I'm vehemently against. But I don't use any cheap tricks like wide-angle lenses or trying to make them look stupid or do anything like that. And actually, this is an important thing as well, is that you were talking about the style of photographing things like in a documentary way, but Gun Nation was the first time that I was fully in control as a photographer about what I was doing. Like I'd worked it out, you know what I mean? Like the rest of it, I'd been feeling my way along and trying to understand it and what I could do and what I would fail at and why wouldn't people let me write as a photographer. Because they would put you in a box. You weren't supposed to do that. And then with Gun Nation, I was like, no, I'm doing this in my way and I'm taking control and I'm not even going to get an assignment. I tried pitching it and people were like, yeah, we kind of know the story about gangs. And I was like, it's not about that. And I was like, forget it, forget it. I'll do this on my own. But I also was more clear about how I was going to photograph it. So some of the images were shot on a medium format camera with lighting and a backdrop. And I wanted them to have the visual language of a family album. Mm-hmm. And I also wanted the reportage documentary images to feel very real and shocking. For instance, in a hospital. I also shot product shots of ammunition and guns and bullets and the products, the paraphernalia, which are actually quite seductive and sexy in a way, just as cameras can be. If you pick up a Leica.
Yeah, you start using things that you use in advertising.
Yeah, I mean, advertising sells it, but I'm saying even the product itself and the way it's visualized makes you want to use it.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Like, look at Apple, like the way an Apple phone is sold and advertised, and you want to use it, you want to own it. Guns and ammunition are sold in the same way in America. So I would photograph them using that visual language as well within the same project, and then mixing these images together and juxtaposing them it really added a different layer, because there was, on one double page spread, there's a picture of this elderly couple. They're born again Christians, very kind of nicely dressed conservatives, like exactly like, say, your grandparents. And next to it is an image of a devastating scene in a hospital, of like where they've cracked someone's chest open to treat a gunshot wound. So then I was playing with like juxtaposition and sort of clash of styles in a way, to make you, to sort of jar you out of this way of reading images. And up till then, everything was either shot in one way, concerned reportage, or advertising, or editorial colour magazines. So it was kind of like trying to do something in a way that made you look at the subject and think about it differently.
Yeah, and I feel like, again, it's a bit like the baby and the gun. Suddenly you got these two things where you see, for me, it's more is the idea of the contrast in the book. And having suddenly, as you say, I don't know, nice looking couple, a very calm looking couple, and then suddenly having the consequences of that is kind of, and I feel like that is also what, to me at least, I always like about your project. I feel like there's something in the language, visual language you use, and you try to not play with, but I feel like you try to be like, okay, what if I put this, a photograph in this way? And I think in a sort of way, when you go to your next project in Love Me, to me, I see like a progression of, it becomes more, it distances itself from photojournalistic language as you did more and more projects.
True. Yeah, each project in a way does do exactly that. You're right.
And with Love Me, kind of, you continued. There's this project now that you did after, which was Love Me. In which you have color.
So yeah, Love Me was about the kind of globalization of a Western beauty ideal. How the beauty industry packaged and sold a very generic Western version of beauty to us and then around the world. So that was a subject. It's very similar actually, because it's driven by commercial, an industry that has to sell us a myth, an ideal, and just as the gun manufacturers did in America. So there's a theme as well that follows through them.
What's the myth?
Well, the myth is that you have to, even if you live in Africa, that you have to conform to a Western beauty ideal. So the Western beauty ideal is a largely fair-skinned, straight-haired, light-skinned, blue-eyed Barbie doll figure as the extreme manifestation of the beauty ideal, supported by millions of Barbie dolls that were manufactured and sold around the world, tens of thousands of advertising posters and billboards. And what you have is, the end product is, you have people all over the globe who are trying to conform to that ideal in some way. People are lightening their skin, straightening their hair. Just Chinese people are changing the shape of their eyes to be more Western. Iranians are having nose jobs to, reduce their sort of strong Iranian nose. There's so many different manifestations of what then happens, and it's all in pursuit of conforming to what has been decreed as being the desirable look.
And suddenly you were traveling again.
Yeah. So we've jumped now, haven't we? We've left Gun Nation.
If you want.
Yeah, well, let's move on from that.
No, if there's anything else.
No, I think we've done it.
It's because you have a lot of projects that are very...
I know.
Each of them, could do 1 hour each.
Yeah.
And it's fine.
No, we're going to speed through it. So Love Me is about that. And that took like 5-year span really to visit a number of different countries, like 17 different countries, because it was about globalization, how you sell an idea around the world. And so, I went to a lot of different places, just explored and interrogated all, why people did things and what drove people to do it.
And, well, you were talking about linking each step, let's say. What was the link? What was the steps between doing Gun Nation and Love Me that you were like, okay, I can...
It wasn't the subjects, but it was the psychology, the psychological factors, how we buy into ideas. So, the beauty industry have made us humans insecure on purpose. If we can make people insecure, if we can make them unhappy with their body, with their looks, with their skin tone, with their frizzy hair, with their flat chest, whatever it is, we can then sell them products. We'll sell it to them as a cure. Even the idea of aging, if we can reconfigure the idea of aging almost as if it's a pathological disease, something you should be embarrassed about, you need a cure. You need, like, just think of it, the word anti-aging on every skin cream. It's become so ubiquitous you don't even notice it. Yeah. You know what I mean? Anyway, so you even sell the idea of aging as something that must be, first of all, hidden with embarrassment, and second, cured by investment in their products. Anyway, so that's what I'm interested in, the psychology of that.
But how's the link?
Well, the Gun Nation was also about psychology. It was about how they've managed to, for years, decades, like 30,000 people are killed every year in America from guns. That's killed. So injured is like 10 times more, right? So it's another 300,000 people that are very badly injured from guns. But somehow the gun industry in America have managed to make it a taboo subject to discuss that, because it's a commercially driven product.
Okay.
Not only have they done that, they've managed to remove any gun controls. So a toaster or a kettle has far more requirements by law to be safe than a gun, because of the gun lobby, the industry in America.
Okay.
And so I was very interested in how that came about, and not only that, but why people accept it.
Okay, I think
why,
that, so like the blind spots.
Yeah, and my other feeling is when something inhabits us, when it's so obvious and it surrounds us, it becomes invisible. We just become used to it. In Love Me, there's a quote by Alain de Botton, who's, if you don't know him, he's a kind of modern day thinker, philosopher, and he said something like, we refrain from questioning the status quo because we associate what is popular with what is right. Meaning, if it's all around us, and if we see it in adverts every day, and if it's on TV and everything else, it must be right, it must be okay, it must be normal. And so I'm very interested in trying to prick that bubble and stand back and say, this is not normal. This is a fucking freak show. It's disgusting what's happening in America to children. Say just one thing, like kids at high school, gun shootings, school shootings. Frequently they're happening. And yet no one will talk about gun control, even for these semi-automatic rifles that are always used in the school shootings.
I think it sounds like psychologically there's almost like this limit of, like, how do you call it when the horses?
Yeah, like blinkered.
Blinkers?
They're actually called blinkers. They're
a bit like blinkers
on a horse. Yeah. So and actually jumping ahead just for a moment, like the project I've just finished, which is called the Anthropocene Illusion, which is an environmental project, is also about how we've blinkered ourselves on purpose in a way, how we can't quite face what we're doing or what we've done, and how we're engaged in creating an illusion to hide from ourselves what we're doing. Again, psychology. So going back to Love Me, just to finish that off, I mean, in a way, maybe we have it. I looked at many different aspects of that world, skin lightening
so the beauty industry
in Senegal, in Africa, nose jobs in Iran, plastic surgery in Brazil. But all of these were manifestations of trying to achieve a more Western look. That was the key thing to that project.
I mean, I feel like what I really liked about Love Me, and I think again it goes back to all your other projects, to me, is that it feels like my inner cynic is hooked in by the first image. I'm like, okay, because I think it's a beauty pageant, or like it's like someone that somehow there's a distance to me. Yeah. And it's like, oh. Yeah. And there's something, I feel like maybe it's an inner cynic thing of like, oh, they just wanna, I don't know, like there's something, not sad necessarily, but I feel like there's a bit of a like criticism of it.
Yeah.
And then, but I do think that your projects kill cynicism in a way, because I feel like I can really feel that there's a learning curve or whatever. Like there's learning from your part also when you're doing the project.
Yeah, I think also maybe what you're describing is like it's a sort of us and them. Like maybe initially you see it almost like them. They are doing something weird. And then slowly as you go through the project, you realize it's not them, it's you as well, that you're in it, that you're part of the culture. And that's what I'm interested in doing as well, more and more.
I think, well, I also think that the empathy kicks in because I remember, because it did make me think differently about, for example, how people look for beauty, and because it's called Love Me because
it's called Love Me for a good reason actually, because ultimately the way I think about it is we all want to be loved. We all want to be fancied. We all want someone to sleep with us and to notice us and to, we want to be loved. It's a natural human thing. But I think the beauty industry have said you cannot be lovable unless you have larger breasts and pale skin if you're in Senegal, and straighten your hair and bleach it. You can't be lovable. You can't be loved unless you do all of these things. And so there's a kind of great tragedy even in the name, just love me, as if it's a plea. And I think, hopefully what you're describing is in the images as well. I'm not really pointing at any individual for doing something wrong or something stupid. There's a sort of agony in the pursuit.
I think there's a lot of empathy on your part when you photo. And I feel like that's what I like about it. Again, I'm attracted because it's a topic maybe I think I know about, or maybe I vaguely heard, like beauty pageants and people that do operations, and that I might look with a distance, or like being like, oh, I don't get why people do that, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But then, I feel like the empathy, which I feel like in documentary photography sometimes, or like in photography, well, in reporting, I don't know. There's not always empathy in people telling other people's stories, even if like sometimes there's always this distance of like, look at these people, they're weird, and I don't understand why they're doing that.
Yeah, like making a freak show out of someone. I'm going to close this door.
Yeah, it's fine.
But
that's what I like. I think I really like about.
I think that's key to me more and more and more, to try and be empathetic, but to also not give people a get out clause, and they could think, oh, it's not really me. It is us. It's our culture, and I, in Love Me, it's also about how men are now being targeted by the beauty industry. I found that really fascinating. Men used to be not part of it. They were allowed to just shamble around with little pot bellies and hairy chests, and even the famous footballers were allowed to look like that. Now, no, they have to be hairless like women. They have to be groomed and muscled, and there's a real thing going on, and that's the saddest thing, is that equality, which is a desirable thing between men and women, the way it's being achieved is not to emancipate women and free them from all of this bullshit, but it's to drag men down to the same level, and that's what's happening. The beauty industry are doing that.
Well, I do think that definitely there's like social media and this constant mirror to yourself that social media is. I do feel like there's more of that, and I don't know, there's an increase of like just
oh my god,
maybe hating oneself or how they look, or
I mean, no, that's it. The genie is out of the bottle now. It's really accelerating. I mean, there's some good traits, movements since I finished the project, actually, that it's not all bad news. There's been, obviously, there's much more of a celebration of diversity now. That was gone before. That's a very new thing. And that's really, a positive thing. So, that, it's not all gloom and doom, but, the idea of just self-conscious narcissism and being judged and having to conform to stereotypes, that hasn't gone away.
Do you ever think, when you start this project, you're like, I'm gonna do the beauty industry. So it feels like there are such huge,
Yeah, I know.
like big topic, or like the environment or gentrification. There's like,
Yeah.
I feel like, so,
No, you're absolutely no. First of all, with the beauty project, with Love Me, I couldn't really believe that there wasn't something already done. You know, I was sort of looking around at work in existence, and you know, obviously people had covered certain aspects of it, but as a kind of broad kind of look at it, and with that theme about you know, a Western beauty ideal, I was like, wow, okay, so I'm going to do this. But I did really feel, wow, this is daunting. You know, how do I begin, and how long is it going to take, and can I do it even on my own, and those sort of feelings. And the same, Gun Nation, less so. That was less daunting because it was in one country. It was in America. I could just focus on it. It didn't feel, it happened more organically. I wasn't sure how it would come out. And then with the Hackney book, it was published called A Portrait of Hackney. That was after Love Me. And the link between that was that I was so tired of traveling and going to the airport or being at beauty conventions and inhabiting that world, sitting with plastic surgeons while they looked at my face, and I knew they were sizing me up, thinking he needs a nose job or a face, you know, whatever it was, literally, because you're in that world.
Do you explain your project when someone?
I give them the basics. Depends who they are, you know. If I tell them, I'm always honest, but I don't tell them my critical views.
Okay.
I just say, this is what it's about. When I finished Love Me, all I wanted to do was be more local. I wanted to do a project that was less ambitious, cheaper, didn't involve travel. And so I didn't even, the Hackney project wasn't even really a project. I just thought, I also want to remember what it's like to just take photographs for the fun of it and to just roam the streets and be like a student, be less serious, not less serious, but less driven by, you know, big subjects. So I thought, I'm just going to do this. I knew that it was kind of interesting in Hackney. Something interesting was happening. I knew that. And I wanted to document fashion, you know, that you saw on the streets. People were wearing kind of funny, crazy shit. And I'd seen Daniel Meadows' book as well, where he travelled around Britain on a double-decker bus. I can't even remember when he did it, but let's say in the 80s. I might be wrong. But just seeing people, the way they were dressed, and these beautiful, simple portraits was lovely. And I thought, I want to photograph what's happening here, that in 20 years it will be equally interesting. That was my only ambition. So I started doing it, and then I slowly started getting more interested in, you know, gentrification and the wealth inequality that was happening in the area. As it got gentrified, you know, richer people were moving in, and hipsters, and yet there was still quite a sort of poor core population of people that had always lived there. But I wasn't too focused on that. You know, that was just a kind of background hum in my mind. So then when I finished the book, and then that was published, and then I made the film The Street, which is about gentrification. Now I'm going to make a film, and I'm going to stay on one street in Hackney. I'm just going to film this street, and try and capture change as it happens. And so that's what I did. That took 3.5 years on and off. And, you know, I wasn't sure if it was possible or if it would be even interesting.
Well, I went to see The Street when you showed it in Hackney, because I hadn't seen it.
Was it Hackney Picture House? Maybe?
Yeah, and I couldn't stream it. Like, you can stream it, but I don't know.
You can now, actually. It's on Amazon, yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
And, but then I thought, I saw you talking about, you shared it, and I was like, you know what? I'll go watch it. And I think it was the best way to watch that film.
Oh, yeah?
Which is, well, I think so, because it was in the cinema in Hackney.
Yeah.
With people that some of them maybe were in the documentary.
Yeah.
And I think the reaction of people, especially because, you know, I'm not from London, I'm not from the UK, there's things that don't reach me completely in terms of like, this person is working class and they have this accent, or this is a traditional thing, or this is that. And there's a lot of that I don't think I get necessarily.
Right.
But I feel like it was very interesting to see it in that.
Yeah, good. Yeah, no, I think it
Context.
really does. It does really work in the cinema. It was just played at the Castle Cinema in Chatsworth Road, and I went to watch it last week, and it does work in the cinema well. Yeah, and that film did far better than I would have ever imagined on that subject. I think it played like in 250 cinemas, and that's unheard of for a film about a social issue. But it's interesting and entertaining, I think. It's not kind of, you don't watch it and feel like, oh God, I'm being hit over the head with a hammer, told what to think. It's got lots of contradictions and...
Well, I think you are... something I was thinking is that I feel like the reason you're good with the hook also, and then there's something about it. I feel like I'm guessing you're a good viewer. I feel like you got in mind when making, and you tell me if it's wrong, but when you're making it, you have a good awareness of like how you react to people's things. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you can't tell already, be like, oh, this is interesting, and that's a gut feeling. But you do think it's from seeing other people's things, and because sometimes I watch things of other people and it's fine. And it's like I'll be like, oof, and I find it boring, or this is very interesting, and that then makes me do things differently when I make it.
Yeah,
that
true.
makes sense.
True. Yeah, for sure. Oh yeah, I really love looking at other people's work and films particularly, and you obviously get influenced on a subliminal level. I have to admit though that when I was making the film I had no idea what I was doing.
Well, what does that mean?
Well, normally with photography projects I feel like I do know what I'm doing, and I have a fairly strong driving force, and I have an idea of how it might look and feel at the end. With the film I had no idea. It was the first time I've ever felt like that. I thought it was probably shit. I thought it was probably boring. I had no direction really. I wanted to stop it halfway through. Like it really was a very different experience. Filmmaking is also hard. It's harder than photography, I think. Even physically it's harder. Bigger, more equipment and hours of filming, and you're talking to people, and I was doing the sound and the filming and interviewing and trying to keep it all going. I did it on my own. So there was all of that too. But the main thing was I was just drifting along, trying to be open to what happened.
Why were you doing it if there was something... So I feel like you said, oh, there's no... this might be shit, this...
Yeah, I remember just thinking something weird is going on. Like house prices in Hackney had gone up 850%. They'd increased by since 1980. And this was the biggest increase possibly in London in terms of the change. We had a government that had kind of done these massive austerity cuts, like £30 billion. Since Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister, Conservative Prime Minister in the 80s till now, they'd got rid of, I think they had 6.5 million council homes or flats, and they'd reduced it to 2.5 million. So it was like a huge, devastating sell-off of council housing. So I knew all of these things, but I didn't know how they fitted together and what they really looked like, what they meant. But they were just thoughts, and gentrification, and also the kind of awkwardness that I felt of being like, am I part of gentrification, or am I a local, or am I a gentrifier? I go to these hipster cafes, I drink my little flat whites, got my Apple laptop, and I look around and I think this is such bullshit, and then I see my reflection in the plate glass window and I realise that I'm it. And so there was a kind of awkwardness about that. But on the other hand, I grew up here too and went to this crappy comprehensive, so I'm not a total newcomer, so I'm like a hybrid. I don't know what I am. Yeah, so all of those feelings, and even, you bounce ideas off people. I remember talking to my dad and my sister. They were normally quite good people because they're not photography. They don't work in the industry, but they're just good people to bounce an idea off. And I told them about the film, and I was like, I'm not sure, what do you think? And they just said, boring. And I was like, what do you mean? They're like, yeah, done it, been there, seen that, gentrification, like, boring. What do you, and it really shook me up because I was at a very vulnerable point.
How many days have you been shot?
Like 2 years.
2 years?
2 years in.
That's harder.
Yeah. And I was like, shit.
Yeah.
I was really worried. And what salvaged it was that I just doggedly kept going. And then at the end, I just worked extremely hard. I've sat down and I watched all the material, every minute of everything I'd shot. It took weeks and weeks to just watch it. And then got an editor to work with, a professional editor. That was the only bit that was expensive, in the filmmaking process. And we edited for 6 weeks. But I'd already carved a very clear idea of what the film would be before I got him to come in and help and work. And then we got down to editing the film.
Well, I think I agree with, of course, I feel like I understand that, yeah, and also you deal with big subjects, therefore there are things that have been talked about, and I think it's difficult to talk about something differently, but I do think that this thing I was mentioning before of like, you're open to think about the thing differently as you go along.
Yeah.
Like you don't just, I have this idea about this, I'm going in, I'm filming what I need to prove my point.
Yeah, true.
And then I'm out. And I think that is what makes it...
True. And that's exactly what happened halfway through the film. I was very worried because suddenly all my local working class, not all of them, some of the working local class characters, there were, let's say, the goodies who were being forced out, the baddies were the property developers and the gentrifiers. But then some of my local working class people suddenly exposed themselves as being quite racist or narrow-minded. And then you feel like this terrible jolt and you're like, hang on a minute, these are the heroes, you can't do that. Now, if you're making a TV program, TV film, you edit that out because you never want to make your heroes compromised. You want goodies and baddies. And I had this terrible decision in the edit and I was like, am I going to be honest about people? Even the idea of gentrification is not all bad. Some of it's good. The schools have got a lot better because of the gentrification and the changes that have come with it.
So the money that comes into the...
Not just money, but attention from council and government and all sorts of things. Yeah, pushy parents who lobby hard for schools to be improved, all those different things. It turned out there was a lot of horrible racism in that street back in the 70s and 80s. Really, I'd say horrible level of racism to people that weren't local. I'm glad that's changed and gone away. So not all change is bad. Some of it really is. But the film slowly starts fraying at the edges halfway through and gets much more interesting. And then Brexit happens and you're like, oh my God, what's happening? And then the Brexit vote happens. And I think the film also helps you understand why Brexit happened. Because a lot of people felt left out of the party. They felt excluded, or none of the economic gains that were being made were coming down to them. The government had, was not investing in people. So many things had been cut back. Or the city had grown. The end of Hoxton Street, there's like this shimmering skyline. There's like a kind of a medieval army, like silver shining army coming down the street. It's a very kind of evocative image. And that had grown up in the last 20 years. And the locals could see it. And this huge wealth as well. But none of it was trickling down into other people's lives. Mm-hmm. And so Brexit, I hate Brexit. It's possibly the worst thing that's ever happened in my life, politically or culturally. And I think it happened just because enough people just felt like, fuck it. They felt left out or not seen or not included in the beneficial changes. And there were many beneficial changes that had happened.
I mean, I think what you were saying about the racism, for example, I remember in the cinema, there's a scene where, I don't want to spoil it, but so I'm not going to be specific, but there is a scene where one of the characters, suddenly there's a point where suddenly they say something racist, or they use a term that's racist. I remember, because the cinema, everyone, which was mostly white, I think, if not everyone, and they're white English, I remember everyone gasped.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, this, I don't know why, it didn't surprise me that the person said something like that. And I thought it's interesting that there is this, I don't know if it's a romantic idea of of the community that is there, the working class, white working class community or whatever, or the way, you know, maybe as you say on TV, you kind of take that out.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to feel like that you're embarrassing someone or like you're.
Yeah, no, it's true. And also, just even the ones who are racist, it turns out, oh, you know, one of them had a German father who was Jewish, and even though she's said some weird stuff, suddenly you realise that everyone's a hypocrite, and half the people in the East End came from other places, and, you know, it's just life, you know, it gets kind of messy and interesting.
Yeah, and I think that's why I like it, because I feel like it's rare to see also some, like even a person portrayed with its more easy to digest sides or pleasing, and then suddenly, oh, this same person is very charming, and at the same time they have this side where suddenly it comes out, which is how most people are, in my experience at least. And I feel like we struggle. I feel like it's difficult to digest a person in its a portrait of a person. No?
For sure. Yeah, and that was the biggest decision in the edit, whether to simplify it and clean it up, or to let it be complex and interesting and a bit messy. But it worked, and you know, I think it's quite funny in a way. The film is kind of, I call it a tragi-comedy. There's tragic elements, there's funny things, there's awful things that happen in it. There's this sort of power of the property developers moving in, destroying this sort of local neighborhood, but yeah, there's all sorts of things going on all at the same time. So yeah, that was the film, and then actually I'd started doing, so the project that I've just finished is called the Anthropocene Illusion, and I had started it before even the film, but then the film somehow took over. I'm not sure why, but it just did, and so that project kind of got put on the back burner, and then there was the lockdowns, and so it's ended up taking ages to finish it.
How long?
It kind of spans, I'd say, 6 years.
Okay.
But even then, if I look at my research document, I've got like a Word document on my computer, which is 2,000 pages long. It's got images in it and all sorts. But if I look at when I first opened it, it was like more like 9 years ago or something. That was when I started thinking about it.
Is that how? So as soon as something kind of kicks in, you start like.
Yeah, sometimes I'll just gather things, and then I might never do anything with it. You know what I mean? So you might have another Word document on something else, but.
So you start with research.
Yeah, just thoughts and research, and not always, but generally, you know, little lists of things that might be interesting, or links to articles, anything. Just a way of gathering thoughts. So that had begun, and it originally had begun because I was wondering why there wasn't more dialogue about the environment in mainstream news and conversation. Then, as I said earlier, things changed. Extinction Rebellion came about. Lockdown happened, focused us more on the natural world, I think. And so now the project essentially is about how, as we divorce ourselves from the natural world, separate ourselves from the other animals, and destroy the natural world more and more, you know, taking away natural habitat from other creatures.
What's the... sorry.
No, just at that moment, what do? We create an illusion, which is why it's called the Anthropocene Illusion.
I was going to ask, what does it mean?
Yeah, the title's the Anthropocene Illusion. Now, I don't know if you know what the Anthropocene is or refers to.
Roughly.
But it's essentially, it's a new term that scientists and geologists are arguing that we're entering a new epoch. So we're currently in an epoch called the Holocene, and normally epochs are measured in millions of years.
Okay.
So when the asteroid hit the Earth and the dinosaurs became extinct, that became a new epoch, and it's measurable in the geological rock beneath our feet.
Okay.
So you can scratch down and see evidence of that meteor strike and the ice age and everything else. So there's an argument that in the last 100 to 200 years, that the impact of humans on planet Earth is so great that it too is going to be measurable in the sort of geological strata when people look back at now. And that will be measured in the fallout of fossil fuels, plastics, nuclear isotopes, even chicken bones, like just in this sort of the number of chickens we eat. So these will be measurable in the layers of rock. And so these scientists are saying we should declare a new epoch, the Anthropocene, the age of human, because of our sort of devastating and huge impact on planet Earth.
Leaving a mark.
Not only are we leaving a mark, but it's extraordinary that we've been able to do it in that short period of time, say since the Industrial Revolution.
Extraordinary in a bad way.
It depends how you read it. I mean,
Okay.
you could say that good things have happened too, scientific invention.
Yeah.
But the things that are going to be readable in the rock are not such good things.
And
Nuclear rate, fallout, fossil fuel burning. Yeah.
I feel like when people talk about climate and the human's impact, I feel like it always feels like there's because there's a
Negative
negative,
spin.
negatively, because humans are kind of killing a lot of the rest of species,
Right.
just by being there and actively doing it. But I was reading that you were trying to put a distance between, like, aesthetically or like the way you're photographing it, trying to come to it in a different way to what we're used to.
Well, I think I was aware that photography, employing photography to talk about environmental concern, was it become a difficult thing to do because there were these kind of visual tropes that had become very kind of cliched in a way. The sort of smokestacks in China, polar bear on a shrinking piece of ice. There's these images, devastating pollution. These are all important images to have, and to think about and to understand. So I'm not criticising them per se. It's just more that are they having an effect on us anymore? What can I do as a photographer that's in any way different? Do I go and photograph more pollution and say, look how bad this is? You know what I mean? Like, it's just, what do? You become sort of powerless in a way. So I came up with this idea that I suppose the thesis of the project is that, while we're doing this, we're creating an illusion, which is why the project's called the Anthropocene Illusion. And we're creating an illusion to hide from ourselves what we're doing, or make ourselves feel better, or offer some sort of feeble connection to nature, even if it's entirely artificial. So, and by photographing that and the things that we create, these false artificial worlds, they in a way become monuments to the very thing that we've lost. Do you see what I mean? So
the more we lose, the more.
Well, Walt Disney's Africa is an extreme example in Florida. It becomes, you could say, it's a celebration of Africa or the animals there.
Yeah.
I mean, again, it's a very kind of crude Western version of Africa with tam-tam drums and hippos. You know what I mean? It's a kind of, let's say it's a colonial version of Africa. I have to say as well that Mickey Mouse can be found there in a colonial safari outfit with a pith helmet. I mean, that's how extreme it is. So already it's absurd, but that manifestation, that Africa in Florida it's become a shrine, a monument to what's no longer there in a way. Animals that are disappearing, an ecosystem that's been destroyed, shrinking habitats taken over by capitalist interests. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So yes, it works on two levels. One, it's absurd and ridiculous, and another, it's deeply tragic and worrying, and psychologically, it's a game that's being played.
Had you had this progression that I feel like, as I said, for the third time now, but like this progression of coming into the project with an idea and then kind of that changing throughout the project. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, it can change, certainly in the film, The Street, things changed and I had to adapt and change my views, and Brexit happened and then all sorts of things. But with this project, I guess I had a kind of strong idea, like a thesis at the beginning of what I was trying to approach. Same with Love Me. I might find things that surprise me along the way, but I was still working with an idea in mind. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So it wasn't changing dramatically. It was more just the individual things that I found would be extraordinary or surprising or...
Well, I think it's interesting because I feel like the empathy here goes to the chimpanzee we were talking about.
Yeah. Well, they're the losers. Well, in fact, we're the losers as humans as well, because that's the last thing in the project. It says, by creating these artificial worlds, they become monuments to the very thing that we've lost. Inadvertently, it's like a paradox. We've done it by mistake. We've created monuments of things that have gone. Mm-hmm. The one little sort of hope in it all is that we have this innate craving to connect with animals or nature. It's quite strong. We've divorced ourselves from genuine nature and from the animals in a meaningful way, but we now have pets, for instance. We crave our tiny little lapdogs and toy poodles, and I've got cats here running about, and we're desperate for a connection with animals, but it's a kind of domesticated version. Or we go to a tropical rainforest in Germany, there's one in a dome with a fake beach, an artificial, well, it's real, but it's a rainforest, but it's indoors. Mm-hmm. It's so big, the dome, that you can have a hot air balloon and float around it.
Really?
There's waterfalls, birds flying around in it. Why?
Why did they do that?
Do you mean why does it exist?
Yeah.
For people to go on holiday in.
Oh, okay.
Because you can. The thing is, right, you can go on holiday there. You don't get bitten by mosquitoes, and nothing eats you or bites you. You don't get sweaty getting there. You drive there. You park in the car park. You pay your entry fee. You get your beach towel and your little cabana hut indoors. So it all smells of kind of faintly of chlorine, and it's got that echo that those indoor places have. Yeah. I really hate them personally, but people go there on holiday for a week, and the kids are safe playing on the little concrete beach with waves, a wave machine. There's actual sand, and there's a snack bar, and you get your food. So it's an appalling dystopian version of nature with all the consumer things that make life easy and simple.
I feel like I find it hard to be like, why would you do it? Why would I go there?
But go there, and there's tens of thousands of people there. So
if your friend goes with their family, is that what you mean? People
go, that's all I can tell you. And more and more people seem satisfied with it. You know what I mean?
Because if you don't have an experience that is... So if you've not been in a real nature, then this seems like... This is crazy. This seems amazing.
Yeah, I guess it's good enough. It's good enough. You feel like you've had your little beach holiday and you've seen some birds and some animals, totally captive, domesticated. It's satisfied some innate craving you have as a human for that connection. But the danger is, whether or not you like it is another matter. The danger is that it provides you, it becomes, an illusion, a mask from the reality. Do you know what I mean? It's sort of, that's the angle I'm coming from.
Yes, like telling yourself, oh, it's fine.
Yeah, and it also allows the horrors that are being perpetrated against nature to continue. That's perhaps the biggest problem, the danger. We want to unsee the reality. We don't want to think about it too much. It's the same with the meat or the dairy industry. Nobody stops. Well, some people do, obviously, but most of us drink the milk. You don't really think about the horror of the way that the cows are forcibly, some people say raped, but let's just say, made pregnant. Mm-hmm. The babies are torn away at birth and killed. Pregnant cows are kept pregnant all their lives, and then they're killed at the end. And there's degrees of the horror of it, but we don't really want to know that. We just want a flat white cappuccino. So we know, but we don't know. We choose not to know.
Do you feel like once, because then what do you do? I feel like sometimes, what do you do when I know?
Well, you can stop drinking milk, for instance. Mm-hmm. You can buy oat milk, and you can at least get organic milk, but some people it's expensive, and there's issues with price. But yeah, you do that, for instance, as a start, and many of us do, but it's mostly we don't. And let's think about the meat industry for a minute, which is way even more appalling. I don't know. I mean, I haven't eaten red meat for 25 years, so that's my one effort, let's say. But I still eat some other things which are not noble. Do you know what I mean? So it's like we can't do everything, but there are things that can be done.
Of course, better than nothing.
Who we vote for is important about, who cares about the environment. Ultimately, this is a whole subject in its own right, and it's one actually that I'm struggling with myself. What do we do? What do we expect from ourselves?
About what?
About everything, about the environment, I mean, my own feeling is that we can't all just feel guilty, put all our energy in our recycling. That's good to do, but we have to start demanding from political leaders and from industry. We have to start withdrawing our money from the worst offending industries, because that's the only thing that speaks the language of the world we live in, votes and money. Do you know what I mean?
I think maybe it's from using the phone and stuff, but and I think I had to relearn how to read the news, because I feel like, I don't know why, there's this just a feeling, even though it's always been probably like this, there's this feeling that there's like constant, even if my life is fine compared, very lucky compared to other situations in the world, but there's this feeling of constant doomed. There's climate, and there's this war, and then there's this thing, and then there's politicians, and I feel like, and I don't know if it's the way we read about things, we know about things, that has this psychologically has this effect of there's too much, and you have this feeling of how am I even gonna do all of this? Yeah,
true. No, it's a huge problem.
I'm not justifying it. I think I'm just only explaining how I feel about it.
No, it's true. And at this very moment of, you could say, environmental crisis, where things get really serious, what happens, just looking at it globally, we get people like Trump in power, you get kind of the rise of the crazies. It's like, we'll look back on it, it's like the kind of the fall of Rome or something, where everyone went mad. So there is something about that, which is dangerous. But it doesn't mean one should just give into it and go with it and become a Trumpist. And neither does it mean you should inherit all the agony and blame and feelings of guilt on yourself. Because I think that's a problem too. Because it replaces anger at the leaders and the political leaders and the people who lead industry, who are not doing anything, who want everything to stay the same. Mm-hmm. It has to be turned against those in power in a way.
Yeah.
And so we're all so busy with our own guilt and our little iPhones and everything. It's all, no one's really thinking outside the box.
Mm-hmm. For the last question, it'd be where do you see yourself in this? Because I feel like there is something in your project where there's a point or whatever where suddenly, and I think that's where the empathy comes in, which is when you see yourself, you understand, you see yourself somewhere in the person you're photographing. How's that in this?
I mean, actually, what's interesting is how few people there are in the photographs in this project. Because normally I photograph people, really, almost always. And these are more animals or landscapes. I mean, there are people in the images, but much fewer than normal. And as you said, the empathy seems to go more with non-human animals. It's worth remembering we are animals.
So then you saw yourself more with the other people that were looking at the chimpanzee. Well, you were saying you were in the car with the aircon.
Well, I'm more aware of how I'm compromised in this story. Mm-hmm. That I'm it as well.
Well, you mentioned that also in the street,
True, and in Love Me to some degree. I'm not maybe causing it in Love Me, but I'm a victim in a way of a society of cultural forces. Mm-hmm. So, with the Anthropocene Illusion, what was the question? The question is, you were talking about empathy and whether,
Well, where were you?
Who do you empathize with in the end?
Sort of, or where you saw yourself within the
think
story.
it's really a very broad cultural look at what's happening, like a phenomena. Like it's an extraordinary phenomena that it looks at, that we're all to some degree engaged in, to varying degrees. So it's not so much looking at one person and thinking, oh, you know, I feel sorry for them, or I'm angry at that one person for doing that. It's more a kind of maybe a cry for a kind of reassessment of our values in terms of the natural world, in terms of just animals. You know, I think, for instance, the rights of animals, of other creatures, is a really interesting and important question that will develop. You know, we're still barbarians in a way. You know, if you think of X number of years ago, we had dancing bears in the street. A little bit before that, we had humans in cages in the street. We were throwing fruit and vegetables in their faces. You know, like we do really weird things, and our standards and expectations of cruelty towards other creatures is changing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I just read an article today about how elephants actually name each other in their own. We were talking about language.
And also about talking, yeah.
But we know whales communicate and sing and all sorts of extraordinary things. Octopuses now we're beginning to understand how intelligent they are. I just think there's such a enormous amount of knowledge that we don't have, and that will slowly, hopefully, reveal itself. Anyway, so I guess we're human, and we tell each other stories and try and learn and understand and make sense of life and make decisions about how we're going to live our lives. So all this is a tiny part of that process.
Yeah.
I think that more and more I realise that's all we can do.
Okay, well, that's a great ending.
Yeah.
And I think we can cut it off there.
Yeah, good.
Thank you very much, because it was long. No,
Yeah, I know.
It
Thank
felt
you.
very long
I
to
hope you can do some editing as well.
No, I enjoy it, but for me, for you.